Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. Thanks for tuning in this morning, and it's good to start another week here at First Amendment Radio. And on Inquisition Update, we've been reading and discussing the book The Papacy and the Civil Power by R.W. Thompson, continuing in our discussion about the hastily and childishly fomented decretals of popes, forgeries, every single one, that were created in order to establish in the world the temporal power of the pope, and also to give immunity both to the popes and to his priests, that they may commit any crime and be held unaccountable by the people and the civil governments of their nations, that all the crimes, the supposed crimes of the priests and bishops of the Roman Catholic Church must be resolved by the Pope. Kind of like the fox watching the henhouse, right? You talk about a conflict of interest. But this is the law as it prevails in the Roman Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic canon law, the law under which the Roman Catholic Church is bound. And it is an ungodly church by any stretch of the imagination. It is not the Church of Jesus Christ, but the Church of Antichrist. Now, continuing our discussion, we're going to back up one paragraph for continuity purposes, and if you're following along in your book, page 381, the first full paragraph, it says, an epistle, remember, these are fabrications, admitted fabrications by the most learned, the most distinguished Roman Catholic doctors and prelates, all admit that these pseudo-Isidorian decretals are in fact that. Pseudo. They're phony. Okay? But still, the papacy insists that they be held as infallibly written and infallibly interpreted by the popes, and their pretensions are infallibly asserted. It says, an epistle from Pope Antichrist on the transference of bishops was designed to prove what no antecedent historian shows, that Peter, as bishop, and we're talking about the Apostle Peter, as bishop, was transferred from Antioch to Rome. He says, quote, Peter, our holy master and the prince of the apostles, was translated for the sake of the common good from Antioch to Rome, in order that he might be in a position there of doing more service, unquote. At another place, he recognizes the obligation of the old Mosaic law. Now, before I even continue, you have to know that this is the extent, the lying extent to which the Vatican will go to place Peter in Rome so that they can assert that he was the first pope, which no such thing ever occurred. Peter never set foot in Rome. But Rome says yes, and they say we know that on the basis of this papal epistle by Pope Antichrist, which we forged. Anyway, it says at another place he recognizes the obligation of the old Mosaic law, quote, that whoever has not given obedience to the priests should be stoned outside the camp by the people, or with his neck beneath the sword should expiate his presumption with his blood. Okay? This is from Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 12. Now this, with the single qualification that, quote, now, however, the disobedient is cut off by spiritual chastisement, and being cast out of the church is torn by the rabid mouths of demons, unquote. You see how this supports the thesis that the Pope can consign you to hell if you don't obey? It says, Dupin establishes this forgery by showing that the author speaks of a bishop of Ephesus named Felix when there was none such, and of a bishop of Alexandria named Eusebius, which is untrue. He also shows that he was contradicted by 3 councils of Antioch, Sardica, and Chalcedon, and that he quotes from popes and others who did not live until after that time. So there you have it. Another example of clearly perceivable fraud being perpetrated by these contrived epistles. And all of them have an object. That is to bolster the pretended power of the Pope in the world, to govern over the affairs of men. Now, continuing now where we left off last time, it says there are epistles from Pope Fabian or Fabianus, who, according to Eusebius, was indebted for his election to the presence of the Holy Ghost alighting upon his head in the form of a dove. Wow, that's cool. And it says, this pope employed the power of excommunication against Privatus, a bishop, for forgery. Or, for heresy. And inaugurated the ceremony of prostration at the feet of the Pope upon the occasion of his election. So here we have the first example of the Pope's recommending, or requiring rather, the newly elected bishops to prostrate themselves at the feet of the Pope. That's right, and if you do a little research on your own, you'll see photographs on the internet of these ordinations that are held at the Vatican in St. Peter's Basilica, where the bishops all line up face down on the floor before the Pope when they are ordained or risen to the position of bishop in the church. It is ghastly if you really comprehend what this represents. Now it continues, he says, therefore there seemed doubtless to be a fitness in attributing some of these forgeries to him. So now we have at least reason to assert that this Pope Fabian was one of the authors of these forgeries. And it says the first of his epistles is addressed, quote, to all the ministers of the Church Catholic, unquote, and concerns, quote, those who ought not to be admitted to clear themselves, and of the duty of having no fellowship with the excommunicated, unquote. So there you have, the Catholics aren't supposed to have anything to do with those who the Pope has excommunicated. And it says, assuming that, quote, by the divine precepts and the apostolic institutes, unquote, the Pope is required to watch over, quote, all the churches, unquote, suppose that includes yours, and exhorting the clergy to be, quote, obedient and faithful children to the holy church of God, unquote, that is, of Rome. He says this, quote, these men and all else who do not teach the true doctrine and hold not the true faith cannot act as accusers of any true believer, because they are branded with infamy and are cut off from the bosom of the Holy Mother, the Church, by the sword of the apostles until their return to correct conversation and belief, unquote. So the Pope, by these false decretals, says that no non-Catholic may bring any charge against a Roman Catholic, because all non-Catholics are infamous. They're not to be trusted. Their word is not valid against any Roman Catholic. And it says, and he is made to repeat the same idea in other forms this way. He says, quote, all who come under suspicion with respect to the Catholic faith cannot be admitted as accusers of those who hold the true creed, unquote. And thus, quote, and therefore are charges which are preferred by those who are objects of suspicion in the matter of true faith rejected, unquote. That's right. Any charge brought against a Roman Catholic by a non-Roman Catholic is rejected. It says he is also represented as saying, quote, and if anyone setting aside the rules wittingly sings with the excommunicated in his house, or speaks or prays in company with him, that man is to be deprived of the privilege of communion, unquote. So you may have no relationship, however minor, with a non-Roman Catholic. If you're a Roman Catholic, you are to have no relationship in any manner with a non-Roman Catholic, lest you be deprived of the privilege of communion. That's right. The priest can exempt you from communion, can refuse to offer you the Jesus cookie, and you don't get to eat Jesus at the Mass. Okay? He is then made to originate and invent what every reader of ecclesiastical history knows to be untrue, the statement that Peter ordained Clement as his successor in the pontificate and, quote, addressed the people, unquote, at his ordination, whereas Peter died about the year 65 or 67, and Clement's pontificate did not commence until the year 91, nearly 30 years after. The words he is said to have used are these, quote, whence also the blessed chief of the apostles, Peter, addressing the people at the ordination of Clement, says this, among other things, making him say that no man should be, quote, on terms of friendship, unquote, with anyone who was hostile to Clement, and also, quote, if, however, anyone is not friendly and speaks with those with whom he, that is, the chief or the pope, speaks not, such a one belongs to those who seek to exterminate the church of God, and though he seems to be with you in body, he is against you in mind and heart. And such a one is much more dangerous enemy than those who are without and who are openly hostile, unquote. And it says, all this is entirely opposed to the spirit of true Christianity, such as Peter taught in the obedience to the precepts and the example of his divine master, capital M, as it is consistent with the stupendous system of papal power and fraud which these forgeries were designed to build up. The entire foundation of the papacy is built on fraud and forgeries and abject lies, all with a purpose in mind, to create the most fabulous, far-reaching, and fraudulent usurpation of God's rightful throne ever to exist on the earth, the papacy. The author continues, he says, there is another epistle of this same pope addressed, quote, to all the bishops of the East, unquote. A portion of this has reference to the renewal of the chrism at the Lord's Supper every year, but it does not fail to lay down the same instruction, attributed by those forged decretals to his predecessors. These words are put into his mouth, quote, the apostles themselves and their successors decreed of old time that those persons should not be admitted to lay accusation who are under suspicion or who are doubtful in the matter of the true faith. Again, reiterating that no non-Catholic may issue a charge against a Roman Catholic, or especially its bishops or its priests or its pope. Also, quote, those have now speaking of non-Catholics, those have neither the right nor the power to accuse the priests or the clergy, who are incapable themselves of being made priests legitimately and are not of their order, etc. In other words, if you're not worthy to be a Roman Catholic priest yourself, you have no business laying a charge against one of the priests. And again, quote, the priests too, whom the Lord has taken to himself from among all men, and has willed to be his own, are not to be dealt with lightly, nor injured, nor rashly accused or reprehended, save by their masters, seeing that the Lord has chosen to reserve their causes to himself, and ministers vengeance according to his own judgment. For these are rather to be borne with by the faithful. In other words, these crimes, these criminal bishops and priests are to be borne or carried by their faithful than subjects of reproach. Just as there is chaff with the wheat, even in the last winnowing, there is bad fish with the good, even in their separation, which is yet to be on the shore, that is to say, at the end of the world. By no means, then, can that man be condemned by a human examination whom God has reserved for his own judgment, that the purpose of God, according to which he has decreed to save what had perished, may be unalterable, unquote. He is then made to declare that all who have sinned shall, quote, go down into the pit, unquote, unless, quote, restored by sacerdotal authority. What is sacerdotal authority? That is the authority of the Roman Catholic priests. And to assign to the apostles the determination, quote, that the accusing of priests should be a matter undertaken with difficulty or never undertaken, that they ought not to be ruined or displaced by wicked men, unquote. By the assumption that he, as Pope, is equal to the apostles, he is made to declare that if any one of the clergy, quote, proves an enemy to his bishops and seeks to criminate them, unquote, he shall be removed and given over to the Curia or the court of the Inquisition at Rome as its prisoner and slave for life and, quote, remain infamous without any hope of restoration, unquote. And then his epistle proceeds further. It says, quote, in like manner we decree and ordain by apostolic authority that the flock should not dare to bring a charge against their pastor, to whose care they have been consigned, unless he falls into error in the faith. For the deeds of superiors are not to be smitten with the sword of the mouth. Neither can the disciple be above his master, unquote. Again, quote, after the example of Ham, the son of Noah, they are condemned who bring the faults of their fathers into public view, or presume to accuse or calumniate them, even as was the case with Ham, who did not cover the shame of his father Noah, but exhibited it for mockery. And in like manner, those who are justified by the example of Shem and Japheth, who reverently cover and seek not to display those matters in which they find that their fathers have erred, unquote. You see what this is? A condemnation of anybody who would reveal a single fault of the priests and bishops and popes of Rome. You are equivalent to that of Ham, the example of Ham. Okay? You see the immunity of the priest building in the pseudo-Isidorian decretals? Every Roman Catholic must live with his heart in his mouth. His very life flash before his eyes should he even think of accusing a Roman Catholic priest of sodomizing his little altar boy. You see how this goes? He continues, he says, then the mode of procedure against a bishop for violating the faith is prescribed when the epistle says, quote, for his other actings, however, he is rather to be borne with by his flock and those put under him than accused or made the subject of public detraction, unquote. In other words, every effort must be made by everybody in the Roman Catholic Church never to speak of any error or fallibility of these priests. They are to be regarded as alter Christos, in other words, another Christ. And if they should happen to expose their shame to the world, it's to be denied and covered up by the faithful. And isn't that what we see in the world? Now, there's also a third epistle from this same pope addressed to, quote, Bishop Hilary, unquote, wherein he is represented as repeating his decree in favor of priestly immunity in these words, quote, we decree and resolve that those who are not of good conversation, or whose life is impeachable, or whose faith and life and liberty are unknown, should not have the power of accusing the priests of the Lord, unquote. Epistles are also inserted from other popes, to wit, Cornelius, Lucius, Stephen I, Sixtus II, Dionysius, Felix I, Eutychian, Caius, Marcellinus, Marcellus I, Eusebius, Sylvester, Marcus, Julius I, Liberius, and Damasus I, so as to bring the decretals right down to the time of Pope Siricius in the year 385, and thus, with those compiled by Dionysius, to render the code of canon laws complete. So here we have again, all of this effort. The Dionysian Code, the Pseudo-Isidorian decretals, and other decretals of the popes were assembled after their manufacture to form the Roman Catholic canon law. Okay? Not viewing the law of God, the Ten Commandments, or any other law of Jesus Christ pertinent to the Roman Catholic Church, they had to assemble their own book of law, and it was simply the decrees of these popes. These popes have replaced Christ. Not just in word, but in deed. Christ is the lawgiver. You may not add one jot or tittle to his law. That's what he said. But the Roman Catholic Church has made a preoccupation. The papacy has made its desperate preoccupation. And I use the term desperate appropriately here. A desperate preoccupation to justify the greatest fraud that was ever perpetrated upon the earth, the papacy. And they do it through forgeries, fabrications, outright lies, lies that would embarrass a young child. They are universally rejected, even among the most pious Roman Catholics. And yet they are still regarded as the divine justification for the usurpations and presumptions of the papacy, making the papacy King of Kings and Lord of Lords on the earth. It says the great ecclesiastical historian Dupin says of them all that they are all full of several passages taken out of the fathers, the popes, and the councils, more modern than the very popes with whom they presumed to be written, and in which many things are to be found that don't in the least agree with the history of those times, and were purposely said to favor the court of Rome and establish her pretensions against the rights of bishops and their liberty and the liberties of the church. Now, we're hearing from the late ecclesiastical historian Dupin, who says of these false decretals that they, quote, are full of several passages taken of the fathers, popes, and councils more modern than the very popes by whom they are pretended to be written, and in which case many things are to be found that don't in the least agree with the history of those times, and were purposely said to favor the court of Rome and establish her pretensions against the rights of bishops and the liberties of the churches. But it would take up too much time to show the gross falsity of these monuments that are now rejected by common consent, and even by those authors that are most favorable to the court of Rome, who are obliged to abandon the patronage of these epistles, though they have done a great deal of service in establishing the greatness of the court of Rome and ruining the ancient discipline of the church, especially in relation to ecclesiastical decisions and rights of bishops." Unquote. These liberal quotations from the false decretals, otherwise scarcely excusable, are necessary to show how the popes and the Roman Catholic hierarchy have laid the foundation of their enormous power and prerogatives. The system they have built upon this foundation would have been bad enough if what has been put into the mouths of these popes had been actually uttered by them. But when it is considered that these things are the corrupt inventions of priests of the 9th century, and that this fact is known to all intelligent Roman Catholics, and frankly admitted by many of them, it almost staggers human credulity to suppose that there are now any in the world who are willing to risk their reputation for integrity and candor by attempting to maintain a system thus originated and upheld. There's nothing else among all the nations of the earth bearing any resemblance to it. No other system by which it has been so daringly and perseveringly proposed to erect within all the governments of foreign and antagonistic power, independent of all human law and irresponsible to human authority. By means of it, emperors, kings, princes, and peoples have been brought down to abject humiliation at the feet of innumerable popes who claim to be in the place of God on earth, have lorded it over them with a severity which never abated and an ambition that could never be satisfied. It is marvelous to contemplate the origin and progress of such a structure of fraud and wrong, to observe the popular degradation which it wrought out as the means of securing the triumph of the papacy, and to see the patience with which the world now tolerates the insolent ambition which demands its reconstruction in the name of God and humanity. Notice the word R.W. Thompson rightly uses here, the reconstruction of this fraud called the papacy. You see, during the Protestant Reformation, the papacy was reduced to near rubble. There was one time in Christianity that it was universally believed that the Pope fulfilled all the Bible prophecies regarding Antichrist, and that the Roman Catholic Church would be shunned and denounced as the Church of Antichrist. That was the Protestant Reformation. So something has happened to the Protestant Reformation that allows even the possibility of the reconstruction of this papal usurpation of Christ's throne on the earth and his temporal power over the kings of the earth to rule the people as the Nicolaitan that he is. Something has happened to Protestantism. There's no question about it, and R.W. Thompson is writing about it. Okay? Now, he says this language is not too harsh. The pretense set up in these false and forged decretals deserves condemnation in even harsher and severer terms. They are designed to secure to the Roman Catholic priesthood the most perfect impunity and to place them so far above the people as to put it out of the power of the latter, that is the people, even to complain of their oppressions. They allow a Roman Catholic bishop or a Roman Catholic priest to commit any crime he pleases, murder, robbery, rape, or seduction, and I will add pedophilia, and deny his responsibility to the laws of the country where he resides, or to any other law but that which the Pope may enact. They command the members of the Roman Catholic Church to regard these bishops and priests as their masters and to conceal and cover up whatever crimes they may commit, rather than bring disgrace upon the Roman Catholic Church. They pronounce as unworthy of belief all who are not members of that church, so as to render the conviction of a bishop or a priest impossible upon their testimony before the court of Rome, even for the most outrageous offenses. They, in fact, authorize and license whatsoever a bishop or a priest shall do, although he may drag his clerical robes into the very filth and mire of profligacy, prostitution, and vice, and again, I add the word pedophilia. These priests are career criminals. Why? Because they've been given immunity from prosecution. Now, at the time of the declaration of papal infallibility in 1870 at the First Vatican Council, there was a liberal Roman Catholic, very powerful and respected man. His name was Lord Acton. He was a liberal Roman Catholic, and he was very concerned about this so-called pretension of infallibility of the Pope. And he made a statement that is quoted to this very day. Most people don't know who he is. They don't know that he was a liberal Roman Catholic. And they certainly don't know that he was speaking about the papacy. And here's what he said. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. That from the mouth of a Roman Catholic. And he was speaking about his papacy and about his priests and bishops. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. He was saying that they were absolutely corrupt, and the corruption would get only worse after the declaration of papal infallibility at the First Vatican Council. And isn't it interesting? This book was written only 6 years after that council. R.W. Thompson, The Papacy and the Civil Power. And he's exposing the supposed immunity of the pedophile priests and bishops and popes of the world and their other crimes, and that they cannot be charged. No accusation may be laid against the priest except another priest. And if the accusation stands, then it is taken to the court of Rome, where the bishop of bishops, the Pope of Rome, decides the matter. No civil authority has any right over the priests. No jurisdiction over the priests. Hard to believe? It's evident in the news. Anytime the subject of priest pedophilia is addressed, you always have the Vatican and the papacy defending these priests, calling their accusers money-grubbing opportunists that want to enrich themselves of the Vatican treasury. They just want a cash settlement. That's all it is. They're non-believers. Their faith in the Roman Catholic Church is questionable at best, and they're just wanting to get into the Pope's purse. And these people who bring the charge against the priest become the victims, become the criminals, facing charges from the most powerful institution on the planet, the Vatican, the Pope, the papacy, and his Roman Catholic hierarchy of priests, cardinals, and bishops. The weight of the world comes down on anyone who would accuse a priest of a crime. They are sacrosanct. Now, stop for a minute and think. What would be the condition of affairs in the United States of America if these infallible and completely immune priestly criminals got control of our government? What condition of affairs would exist? that Roman Catholic canon law would replace our civil laws. That no charge would be brought against the priest, that the state would establish Roman Catholicism as the state religion, if not overtly, at least covertly, by simply destroying the Constitution and the laws of the United States and replacing them with canon law. The decrees of the popes, these pseudo-Isidorian decretals, these false decretals. And that together, if that be the case, then together the state and the church would be sacrosanct, and you wouldn't be able to bring a charge against the government. See how this works? And not only would you no longer be innocent until proven guilty, you would be treated as you were in the days of the Holy Roman Inquisition, guilty until you prove your innocence. You see, there's a lot of people that get on the bandwagon and say, this is a Christian country. We need to have a Christian country. We need to establish Christianity. I don't have anything wrong with freedom of religion, but look what happens when you unite church and state. I'm telling my listeners that if you fall for any movement to have the United States officially declared a Christian country, Roman Catholicism will rule supreme. And they will be joined by all the ecumenical churches, once called Protestant, who will now put their shoulder upon the wheel, and will be reduced to the dark days of medieval times when the popes ruled supreme. Remember, R.W. Thompson said the Reconstruction. We're in this time of reconstruction of this papal pretension. That was back in 1876. Imagine how far their efforts have gone since then. The American people are cognizant now that they're losing their constitutional rights. And I am particularly cognizant of the fact that unlimited attacks are being made against my right to speak about these things, particularly on amateur radio, with the support of the American Radio Relay League and the Federal Communications Commission, who simply turn a blind eye and a deaf ear to the hordes of people who maliciously and intentionally interfere with my transmission so nobody can hear me. That's the evidence that this union of church and state has brought to bear, even in amateur radio, this ecumenical movement of uniting once Protestant evangelicals in with this Roman Catholic usurpation in the flowery attempt to make the United States Christian when it is in fact becoming Roman Catholic. Now, and one just has to realize that if you're unhappy with losing your First Amendment rights or any other of your civil rights, you should first suspect that the very ecumenical movement that you belong to, the very church that you support with your tithes, are being used to support this new Catholic, not Christian, this new Catholic attempt to make the United States a quote-unquote Christian nation. Now look, there is a Christian nation in the United States of America. It's called the body of Christ. And Christ is our King and our law. That's the kingdom to which we belong. We only live in the United States of America. So let us not equate our nation and our king the body of Christ with what we see in the world. We're a holy nation, not a sinful nation of sinful men. We are to be distinguishable from that which governs this land. Let us recognize who we really are and not lump ourselves in with this human contrivance that insolently calls itself Christian. Okay, we'll continue now with the Pseudo-Isidorian Decretals in chapter 13 of the book, The Papacy and the Civil Power, beginning on page 387. This is going to be a very busy chapter. We're going to continue to talk about these false decretals that form the basis of Roman Catholic canon law, the temporal power of the Pope, and the immunity of the priests. We're going to talk about Nicholas I, who was governed by them, his character. We're going to talk about Adrian II, John VIII, John XII, Benedict IX, these three popes at the same time. That's right, there were three popes at one time, three infallible popes, all issuing anathemas and excommunications and damnations at one another. They all each called the other Antichrist, and I always like to laugh and joke. And they were all absolutely correct. We're going to talk about the German emperors who created popes. Leo IX, Hildebrand, and he becomes the pope as Gregory VIII. Principles established by him, his quarrels with Philip of France, his bull against Henry IV. He adopts the false decretals, as all popes do. Pius IX does the same, and Pius IX was the one who wrote his encyclical and syllabus of error of 1864, just prior to the time of the writing of this book. He, too, asserted his divine right to rule the world by these phony papal decrees that form the basis of canon law. We're going to talk about Gregory VII, who stirs up a revolt in Germany, the Emperor Henry IV in Rome, and took a little visit to Rome. It'll be interesting to see how that took place. The death of Gregory VII, his successors maintain his policy. Urban II, Calixtus II, Adrian IV grants Ireland to England. That's right, the Pope has the power to grant land, and, to seat and unseat kings and to give them a kingdom and to take it away if he wants. And that's the case with Adrian IV, who granted Ireland to England. The Gratian Decretals, they authorize physical compulsion and torture. They authorize physical compulsion and torture. The Roman Catholic Church historically used physical compulsion and torture to convert people to Roman Catholicism. Nicolaitanism, that's what the Roman Catholic Church is. We're going to talk about Arnold of Brescia, burned by Adrian IV, Alexander III, and Victor IV. Alexander III releases the subjects of Frederick Barbarossa from their allegiance. That's right, the popes can cause a rebellion. As a matter of fact, the only right rebellion is when the Pope calls for it. Any rebellion against any government in the world not called for by the Pope is called rebellion. And the Pope can strike it down, too. We're going to talk about his character, the submission of Frederick, the Third Lateran Council, the decree authorizing Waldenses and Albigensians to be put to death. This one is particularly interesting to me. And we're going to talk about the 13th century, Pope Innocent III, his ambition and usurpations, his claim of divine power. He releases the subjects of Otho from their allegiance, his bull to put the Vaudois to death, the Inquisition, Pope Boniface VIII, his bull Unum Sanctum, and he causes a new body of false decretals to be composed. And we're going to talk about the opposition of the Gallican Church And before we even start, I want my listeners to know that the Gallican Church was centered in France. It was sick and dang tired of the papacy governing the affairs of their nation, and they rebelled against the papacy. And what a glorious rebellion it was. And R.W. Thompson's going to get into it. And there are quotes in this chapter that are stunning in their disdain of the papacy. The Gallican Catholics. It was Catholics always in history that rebelled against the papacy and put the papacy back in its box. You know, Protestants today are all about peace and unity and no more infighting, and you know, they don't want to be considered haters, because that's what that's the label that's plastered on your forehead if you should reject this phony, pretentious, lying offer of peace from the Roman Catholic Church at Vatican Council II. The Gallican Christians, the Gallican Catholics, rather, of France, rebelled against the papacy. And it was just fantastic. It's the example that should be used by Roman Catholics in this country, together with their ecumenical brothers, to kick the Pope and his priests, and especially his Jesuits, out of this country, as did the Gallican Catholics in France. If you want to, you know, increase your understanding of history and how Catholics have raised resistance against the popes for their abuses, simply study the Gallican Church of France. Now, with what little time we have remaining, we'll continue with the book. It says, "We shall leave our investigation incomplete and our task unfinished without further notice of the false decretals and their contribution to the growth of the temporal power, inasmuch as the principles derived from them still remain a part of the canon law of Rome, those of the encyclical and syllabus of error of 1864 by Pope Pius IX being taken in part from them, and as the present struggles of the papacy and its Jesuit supporters are designed for the purpose of reviving and enforcing them wheresoever they can obtain the power to do so. Although there were many good and pious Christians among the early popes and clergy of Rome, yet there was enough in the vicious habits of many of those who constituted the priesthood at the time when these decretals are alleged to have been dated, to justify the assignment of them to the popes whose names they bear. Many of them yielded to the influence of the example of Pope Victor, and the effect was apparent in their ambition that of the clergy, which existed to such a degree that religion was almost entirely neglected, except in the mere ceremonial requirements of the church." So this ambition of raising the papacy to a temporal king of kings and Lord of lords, became the primary purpose of the Roman Catholic Church. The only thing that remained of the so-called Christian faith within it was simply the participation in the Mass and some of the other ceremonial things like baptism and that sort of thing. There was no preaching of the gospel. It wasn't the concern of the Roman Catholic Church to preach the gospel. It was to become all-powerful. And that's what we're going to talk about as we continue to read our book, The Papacy and the Civil Power by R.W. Thompson.